Welcome back to Noisegate and welcome back to my home studio. Recently on the channel, we were talking about the Maestro FZ1 or FZ1, depending where in the world you're from, which is also known as the introduction sound or the fuzz sound at the beginning of the Rolling Stones' Satisfaction. Now, the story goes that Keith Richards played that using that fuzz pedal as a placeholder for what the saxophones would do in that song. Now, the producers of that song, after Keith Richards had left the studio, made the executive decision to actually keep that fuzz tone in because they knew that that fuzz tone was so unique that it would be something that would grab people's attention. And any pop producer today will tell you that the sound you use for your hook is as important as the hook itself. This got me to thinking, why in the guitar world are we so hell-bent on chasing the tones that we already know and love and recreating them rather than trying to forge forward and push for new and exciting sounds that will grab people's attention? So I thought today what I would do is I would try to create a few new and unusual non-guitar sounds using a couple of pedals. And the two pedals that I'm going to use today to help me get this are, first of all, the Source Audio C4 Synth and the Source Audio Kingmaker Fuzz. Now, a quick aside. The Kingmaker Fuzz, I believe, is at the moment probably the biggest sleeper pedal going around. Too few people know about this pedal. Now, this is a pedal. This is a fuzz pedal with stereo outs, stereo ins, and a USB control input, which is not your traditionalist's fuzz. However, the fuzz and distortion tones that you can get from this pedal are quite unbelievable. Not only can you get a whole range of different tones imitating the classics, you can also get a whole lot of very, very unique distortion sounds by using parallel processing. Parallel processing is where you take your guitar signal and instead of processing the sound of two distortions, one running into the other, which is the way that we tend to do things when we set up guitar pedals, parallel processing allows you to actually have the tone of one independent of the tone of the other, which allows for not only much greater clarity with your tone, but also a really great stereo width. Now, we're going to hear some of that in the video today. So let's get into it. In the spirit of unique tones, I wanted to also use unique guitars that you don't often see in review type videos. You've definitely seen videos, and I've definitely done videos using Les Pauls or 335s or Tellys or Strat type guitars, but a couple of guitars that you don't often see in videos that I'm going to use today. Number one is this here Dan Electro baritone guitar. Now, these are a good fun instrument, and that is not something that you see often in review videos. And the second one that I don't think you really ever see in any review videos is the old Steinberger. Now, these guitars are, you know, notoriously uncool and notoriously kind of related to, shall we say, 80s style jazz fusion. However, they do have some unique tones and it looks kind of cool. So I'm going to use that. Let me talk about the setup very quickly. I have got a C4 synth running. I'm going mono into that and I'm going stereo out of that into the stereo ins and outs of the Kingmaker. Stereo outs of the Kingmaker, one of those is going via this delay and they are both going into two channels of my UA Apollo. I have a very simple bass amp setup on the Apollo for my tone, which I'll show you that clean tone in a sec. Another note If you are looking for a unique guitar tone, you don't have to always reach for guitar amp sims. You can use a bass amp sim like the Ampeg SVT and get a very usable and very, very nice, clean guitar sound. That sounds like this. Now, I've got a few patches that I've either pre-made or that I've got from the Source Audio community downloads, and I have sent them into these pedals directly. Let's start with this first one here, which I have got, which is something like a Moog Taurus. So one of the things about playing a pedal like this is that you actually have to play the guitar a little bit differently, which, again, just as an aside, will hopefully bring different things out of your playing. A lot of these sounds actually re-trigger with the envelope that is being sent to it. So when you play the note again, it sort of starts to sound again. So let me demonstrate that with this patch here, which is called Da Funk, named after the Daft Punk song of the same name. If I play in my kind of more usual legato style, you can actually hear that the sound kind of gets lost a little bit there, because the way that this tone is designed means that you actually have to play a lot more staccato. So if I turn this off, I'm playing like that. So instantly, by having this slightly different pedal tone and being forced to play a bit differently, you're hopefully going to be inspired to do something a little bit different. Now, let's go to another tone here. This one I kind of like. It's got a real stereo spread to it, and you'll hear that in your left and right of your headphones that you are hopefully listening to this on. But this one is called Gated Phaser. Now, I often think how cool a sound like this would be in a heavier context, where it would be doubling or fattening up your sort of more classic rock guitar tones. So I want to show you that by playing a combination of standard guitar distortion tones with this synthy kind of sound, and you'll hear that it really fattens up and gives a unique tone to the riffs. Start thinking about how you could use a sound like this in your next hit. Huge fat sound without actually being too in your face, and it really makes that riff sound mega. Many guitar players in history, notably in my head someone like Alan Holdsworth or Pat Metheny, have attempted to use MIDI as part of their guitar sound. MIDI has come a long way in recent years, and it's certainly getting better at turning guitar information into MIDI information. But it does have a few flaws. And one of the things about the C4 Synth is that being not a MIDI pedal, but actually a processing of your audio, you get a lot of those MIDI style sounds being sort of synthy sounds without the shortcomings of MIDI. While Metheny used the Roland GR300 guitar synth, and Holdsworth used what was called the Synth Axe, which was like a hybrid kind of piano / guitar instrument, both of them required extra gear to get those sounds. Now, a lot of us don't want to add pickups to our instruments, or to bring a whole nother instrument and a computer as well for MIDI, or an extra MIDI processing floor unit. So what the C4 obviously allows for is that you can use your regular guitar without having to add any pickup to get synth sounds. Now that is an amazing advantage if you want to just quickly get synth sounds from your axe. It also tracks really well. One of the things about MIDI is that there are sometimes some latency issues, especially if you have wireless MIDI, or especially if you are, running or playing a lot of notes. The C4 is really good at tracking whatever you're playing and turning them into synth sounds without too many glitches. One of the things a MIDI pickup also doesn't do that well is sort of translate these guitarisms into MIDI information. And one of those things is dead notes in between notes. Now this applies to bass players as well. On the guitar and the bass, we play a lot of dead notes in between the notes that we're actually playing. Now a MIDI pickup will want to usually turn them into notes and thus be played as a sound that you may not want to hear. Whereas we're trying to get that sort of percussive sound in between the line that we're playing. The C4 is very good at telling the difference between those notes. Those sort of sound. The C4 seems to know that that's not a note and is actually a kind of a dead percussive sound, which we on the guitar really like to use. Now all of that is in the C4 and I have only just scratched the surface. Using the Neuro editor, you can get so deep in the programming of sounds in this. There are 4 voices for synths, there's 2 different processors for distortion and EQ, and you've got 128 presets that you can access via MIDI. Let's move on over to the Kingmaker Fuzz. The Kingmaker Fuzz doesn't have 128 presets, but it does have the same ability to control these sounds via the Neuro editor, which is on the screen here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to process these 2 sides a little bit differently. On the right hand side, first up, we're going to hear quite a dull distortion sound. I've taken the highs out and I have increased the gain a little bit, and it's almost kind of fuzz territory, but it's a very, very woolly sounding overdrive. Let's have a listen. Possibly not the tone I would use on its own, but bear with me. Let's have a listen to the other side. So on the left-hand side, you're now going to hear a much brighter overdrive sound. So I've got the bass and the low mids in this turned right down, and I have got the high mids and the treble turned up. I've also blended in a little bit of the clean or undistorted tone as well. So let's have a listen to that. Now, very bright, very abrasive. If I were to blend them both back together, I'd get this. Which I think is a really, really fat sound. Now, one of the things that makes that fat is the fact that the left and the right are slightly different in tone. For the sake of the demonstration here, I'm going to actually now run them in series and show you what that sound is. So this is how you would connect pedals if you were doing it in the real world, which is to say your guitar goes into one, comes out of it, into the next one, and continues on. So let's have a listen to these stacked. Now, there's nothing wrong with that tone at all, but there is a lot of compression and kind of grit and squishing of that sound that I don't really like as much as when it's processed in parallel. And because you get that left and right kind of spread, the sound to me is actually bigger, even though it's kind of less gainy. The ability for this pedal to process these in parallel and then send them out either stereo or mono makes for a whole lot of interesting sounds. Now that sort of change in tone between the two sides just gives you this width that really can help you pop out of a mix. Now the next sound that I've got here is kind of a tube screamer and an octave fuzz. Once again, if I ran these into each other, they sound quite different than if they are processed in parallel. So I'll show you the sound, but first of all, I've got my sort of darker tube screamer over on the left, which sounds like this. And then on the right, I have a more classic octave fuzz, which sounds like this. Now, before I show you them split, let's run them into each other, which sounds like this. Now let's run them in parallel, and not only do we lose a lot of noise because one overdrive is not amplifying the noise of the other, but we get a wide stereo sound which sounds huge. Now the last thing that I want to do today is bring in this little Ibanez delay here. Now, because I have this stereo output, I have got my delay on one side, which is allowing me to just slightly delay one side of my drive sound. So I'm going to use a very short delay, and I'm going to have the blend set all the way wet. I'm going to have the repeat set to only one repeat and the delay really short. Let's have a listen. On, off. Something that guitarists sometimes struggle with live and in the studio as well is enabling a solo or a lead line to pop out of the mix and be heard by the listener in the way that you want it to be heard. Now, when you just add more distortion, you get more compression, you get more stuff that's kind of mashed on top of each other, and you don't necessarily cut through. If you add volume to that, you can clip your overdrive, all sorts of mix problems. One way around this is to actually create space or create interest to the listener. And by using a slight delay like this, you can actually create that width without really adding any volume. So let's say you wanted to play you wanted to use this tone for your riff. You want to have the same tone for your solo. Now, without adding too much volume or anything like that, by adding a slight delay on one side, you create that width and you create the attention-grabbing sound that will give you the ability to jump out of the mix. Using these little stereo tricks like this can give you that ability to jump out of a mix without having to add volume. So I know you want to hear these pedals running into each other. So I'm going to play the C4 Synth with a preset called Funk Dragon and the Kingmaker with a preset called Chewbacca. Huge. I'm just going to finish here with a very, very sputtery fuzz on its own, sounding like this. And I'm going to add in this C4 Synth tone. And I'm going to put them together, and we're going to get... trying to make music that is going to grab people's attention, especially in this world where you don't have a lot of time to get people's attention, we need things that are going to make people go, what is that? And by using interesting sounds on your guitar that people have not heard before is going to hopefully hook people in to at least pay attention past the first 30 seconds. When you are looking for a unique tone, do not write off pedals that you think won't get you those classic tones. When you have a preset on a unit that says Foxy Lady, you are going to play and sound something like Hendrix. When you see a preset that says something like Streets Have No Name, you are going to do those edge licks. When you see presets that say clon, it's going to sound like a clon. But using pedals like the C4 or the Kingmaker that give you these very, very strange and unusual ways of processing your sound is going to give you tones that no one's heard before. And ultimately, that's what we are trying to do, is be unique, not only in what we play, but how we sound as well. As always, remember the most important thing is a sound that helps you create great music. Whether that's a classic tone or whether that's a brand new tone that no one's ever heard before, if it helps you create great music, then it is serving its purpose. I'm going to end this video with a short clip of me playing both bass and guitar sounds using the C4 and the Kingmaker. And you can hear how these pedals will sound in context. Start thinking about how great unique tones are going to feature in your next song. Thanks for watching Noisegate. See you next time.